Next talk, this is one of our award winners. This won a Social Buzz Award in the drums in the UK. I think for a lot of the Wolfgang team, this is probably some of our favourite or our proudest work, actually. So please put your hands together. Give a big welcome to Roisin. He's going to talk you through how to influence a nation.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello, I hope you're enjoying the day so far. So this time last year, this is like a Roisin-ception, it's very strange. But this time last year, I was on stage with the lovely Kenya, and we were talking about how we helped our client Tesco sell loads of turkeys at Christmas. You'll notice I was wearing a Repeal the 8th t-shirt that day, because Wolfgang Essentials and the referendum were on the exact same day last year. So it was a pretty nerve-wracking day all around. Like many of you, I went and voted that morning before coming here. This is the selfie I took with my dad, obviously, after voting. I think the whole country was pretty nervous on this day. But us at Wolfgang were particularly nervous because we'd actually worked really, really closely with Together for Yes in the weeks leading up to the referendum. In case anybody doesn't know, Together for Yes were the national civil society to remove the 8th Amendment from the Constitution. They're an umbrella group made up of over 70 organisations and groups across Ireland. So I guess the story I'm going to tell you today is the work that we did with Together for Yes in those crucial 8 weeks leading up to the vote on May 24th. So I guess the story begins, like all good stories do, in a group WhatsApp chat. And I got this message into one of my WhatsApp groups. And it was essentially Together for Yes had a call out to for their digital team. So they wanted to put a team together to basically do their digital marketing for them. So a few of us at Wolfgang jumped at this opportunity. At Wolfgang, we've been very vocal about being pro-choice. We've attended lots of the marches. So yeah, we're really, really excited to hopefully play a role in this campaign. So we went to the first meeting, the first volunteers meeting, and I think there was probably a representative from every single agency in Ireland, it felt like. And they were all, of course, digital marketing experts. So on the one hand, I was like, this is great. Loads of people are volunteering their time. On the other hand, and very selfishly, I was like, we're probably not going to play as big a role in this as I'd like, or we're not going to get to be that involved. So after this volunteers meeting, I emailed Together for Yes and said, you know, this is the strategy I would like to take, and this is the amount of time we can offer pro bono to the campaign. They got back very quickly and said, this sounds great, can you come in and chat? So myself and Rob on the client lead team went to meet them again, and I think we thought at this stage it was going to be the meeting where like they've picked their digital team as such, and we were expecting lots of other people to be there. But in fact, it was Together for Yes and myself and Rob, and they said, we'd like for you guys to be our digital team. And we were like, really? Just us? Of course, we were confident we could do a really good job, but we were absolutely shitting it, to be perfectly honest. We're really, really nervous. It's like a lot of pressure, and it might be difficult to kind of think now because everyone knows what the result was, of course. But if you cast your memory back to like early 2018, a lot of the communication was that it was going to be very close and very tight. So we're really nervous, and I guess we're used to our clients, you guys, giving us tough targets and tough KPIs. But when the KPI is a human right, or when the target is to get the Irish population to vote yes in a referendum, it's hard not to feel pressure. But we kind of tried to separate the personal element from this and just treat Together for Yes like we would any client. The first thing we do when we're talking to clients is we ask them what their objectives are. And this was no different. So Together for Yes gave us 3 main objectives. Number 1, drive donations. So they had a crowdfunding campaign. They needed to raise money for posters, for flyers, for ad spend. So this was really, really important. Objective number 2 was to drive voting footfall. So it's one thing somebody saying, yeah, I'll vote yes, but it's another thing making sure they go in and vote on the day, on the 24th of May. So this was also hugely important. And the third objective was to reach and engage with the concerned centre. Now, I'll explain to you a lot more about that in a minute. But first, in terms of our strategy for driving the voting footfall and donations, to be honest, this was really easy. Engaging with the yes voters was very easy, to be honest. And with all social campaigns, we say to our clients, you're probably sick of me talking about the funnel, but we tell them to use the full funnel strategy. So essentially taking your audience from awareness right down into advocacy. So the yes user journey followed this structure as well. So a typical yes voter, the first piece of content they might see might be a video or written piece of content with all the main questions they would have on the referendum. So very, very factual, bringing them into the funnel. If they'd engage with all this content, they're brought to the next stage, which is where the voting footfall piece came in. And we wanted to make sure everyone had checked the register, that they're eligible to vote. So there's lots of content around checking the register. Once they'd engaged with all this content, they were brought into the action stage. And there were a few different actions. First action, of course, was if they'd engaged thus far, they were probably ready to donate to the campaign. So we'd show them lots of donation messages. Also, of course, in the 2 weeks leading up to it, the message, the action was don't forget to get out to vote and vote yes. We're always telling our clients, don't stop at the action stage. Bring your user. It's an opportunity to reach out to them again in the final advocacy stage. And this was no different either. So once people had gone to vote yes, we wanted to make sure that they shared the piece of content that says I voted. And we also wanted them to change their profile picture to say I voted yes as well. So this is just one sample yes user journey. There are many versions of this, of course. If somebody had, for example, already been very involved and had engaged with lots of content previously from Together for Yes, they were fast-tracked into the donations stage, and they're fast-tracked into will you volunteer, join our canvassing groups, and so on and so forth. But now comes the really, really tricky bit, and this was to reach and engage with an audience we call the Concern Centre. Now, none of you will know who the Concern Centre are because it was a term coined by Together for Yes. Essentially, it was an audience of people who were likely to vote yes, but were extremely susceptible to messaging from the no campaign. Essentially, they're people who are on the fence. So when we met with Together for Yes, and they explained this term, and they explained how many people in Ireland are actually falling into this group, it was another like shitting it moment, and we were like, Jesus, this is crazy. We had no idea there was this many people on the fence. So again, it was another nervous moment for us. And there was a few challenges in our way in terms of getting in front of the Concern Centre. The first challenge was that the No campaign had a lot more money. They were rumoured to have funding from US lobby groups, and they also had rumoured to have 3 to 4 times more advertising budget than the Yes campaign. More money obviously means more opportunities to get your messages in front of people. And we know this audience group was susceptible to these messages, so of course that was a little bit worrying. Challenge number 2 was fake news. We can't talk about the referendum without mentioning the topic of fake news. And the No campaign were accused quite heavily of a lot of fake news around this time. I'm sure many of you will remember those posters that were around the country at that time. An example of some of the fake news that was happening was, I think this is a good example, they actually replicated the official government publication. So this was going out to lots of houses. So it looked the exact same as the official unbiased publication, but of course the content in this booklet was extremely different. That's just an example of the kind of tactics that were going on. Facebook were heavily accused of not dealing with the fake news issue, and I'll speak a little bit more about that later on. But these 2 challenges just meant that we knew there was a huge audience pool of people who were going to be targeted with lots of content from the No campaign. So we had 2 tactics in terms of getting in front of the Concern Centre. The first was reach them directly, so reach this audience directly with factual content. The whole Together for Yes strategy was really just to lead with fact and to lead with truth and to lead with credible content sources as well. So can we get this content in front of the right users? The second tactic was to make sure we had equipped all the yes voters with lots of shareable content and fact. We all know the power of a social share. If you share something on social media and your friends and family see it, it has a much bigger impact than if a stranger or a brand was to share it. So it was really important that we'd gotten the yes voters to talk. So this is an example of a video that Savita's parents made. You can see there it had over 5,000 shares and over 9,000 reactions. So you can bet out of those 5,000 shares that some people in the Concern Centre would have seen this content being shared by a friend or family member. So those were the 2 tactics we took in terms of getting in front of them. In terms of getting the content in front of this audience, we let insights tell us what content to create. So using Google Keyword Planner, we're able to see what people were Googling, what questions people had on the 8th Amendment. So we're able to make sure we had lots of great content answering these questions. Together for Yes had loads of focus groups as well, so they were able to feed back to us the top questions people had. We just made sure we had content there answering those questions. The tricky bit, though, is identifying who the concern centre are. If you're making a Facebook ad, you have to target it to someone. You have to put in a location and age and interest and so on and so forth. So Together for Yes, luckily, had done loads of research into who they thought the concern centre were. They're able to feed all this information back to us, and we're able to then create audience personas in Facebook custom audiences. So this is just one very small snapshot of some of the audiences we would have had in our custom audiences in Facebook. So you've got like fathers living in all of Ireland, you've got younger men interested in sports, you've got people who aren't parents living in rural Ireland, and so on and so forth. So we created loads of these audience personas, but then of course we had to map different content to these audiences. The content that's going to work for an 80-year-old male is not going to work for a 60-year-old female. So we had to do a lot of work mapping content against audiences. A few examples of the kind of content we mapped out was, so for example, one of the audience groups is woke men. So these are politically aware men under 40 who don't have children, who live in all of Ireland. So the kind of content we would put in front of them would be Cillian Murphy and Blind Boy discussing the 8th Amendment. Similarly, men 18 to 40 who are really interested in sports, if we had any content from rugby players or footballers talking about the 8th Amendment, we made sure they saw that content. Really interestingly enough, this tactic meant we could actually, get great learnings about what content was working against what audience. So, for example, we soon found out that males in rural Ireland in the 40 to 65 age bracket responded really well to doctors talking about the 8th Amendment. So we had this great piece of video content from Dr. Peter Boylan. He had actually worked, he's retired now, but he'd worked on Holles Street for 40 years. I was telling my mom about this, and she was like, oh yeah, he delivered you and your brother and your sister. If any of you were born in Holles Street in the last 40 years, he probably delivered you as well. So to get this piece of content from him was so credible and amazing. So yeah, we were able to get lots of different learnings about what content was working. We also did another tactic that we call credible content amplification. So of course, Together for Yes had so much content being created at the time, but there was also other sources creating really good content as well. So we did something that we would never, ever, ever usually do for our own clients, and we actually would create ads driving people from the Together for Yes ad to the Irish Times, for example, or RTE or the Journal. And this seems mad because you're spending your own advertising budget on driving users to an external website, which obviously seems crazy because we don't own that audience that goes to that website then, and we can't see how they're acting on the website. But we were willing to spend our limited budget doing this if it meant we got the right content in front of the right audience. Of course, we had to find a way to measure this, though, so we came up with something that we call the concern centre engagement rate. So we're able to see lots of the engagements that were coming through in a piece of content. We couldn't see the traffic on the website because we didn't own the website, but we could track the clicks and the engagement. So we looked at a metric I've never, ever looked at before, and something called non-fan reach and non-fan engagement. So this was just an indicator to us if we were able to see how much of the engagement on this particular article came from people who had never been on the Together for Yes website, who'd never engaged with them previously. It kind of is an indicator that these people are in that concern centre group because they just haven't engaged with us before. And yeah, this was just a way for us to measure, to make sure we're reaching the right people. We really didn't want to be contributing to the echo chamber that was happening on Facebook at that time. We didn't have the budget to be doing really broad targeting and potentially reaching yes voters. Unfortunately, we just did not have the budget for that. We had to be extremely agile, and real-time marketing played a huge role in this campaign. I mentioned Facebook earlier on coming under fire for not dealing with the fake news issue. In the 2-3 weeks before the referendum, they had to do something because it was getting out of control. So they released something that's called the Ads Transparency Tool. This tool is still available now. We're actually the first country in the whole world to get full access to this because of the referendum, which is amazing. And they only had to release this because of the fake news. Really interestingly enough, the marriage referendum was 3 years before this referendum, and there was none of these issues occurring, which kind of shows how fast Facebook advertising is moving. So this transparency tool, essentially, what you can do is you can see what any ads that any page on Facebook is running. You could all go onto a competitor's Facebook page right now, click the info and ads button, and you can see what ads they're currently live. It's an amazing tool. But for the referendum, it was really, really valuable. We were able to see what ads the No campaign had running at any given time. We would add these ads to a big spreadsheet, and essentially what we would do is make sure we also had ads running at the same time. Like, we can't stop the No campaign from running their ads. We just had to make sure we were also visible so the user could see both and potentially make up their own decision. an example of how we did this was, like, for example, the No campaign had a lot of content around doctors, and as it turned out, they weren't actually doctors at all. So we made sure that we had our credible Dr. Peter Boylan, those ads running at the same time. So this is just a really great functionality that was released at that time. To be honest, this was another scary moment in the campaign for me personally, because, you know, on my Facebook and Instagram feed, I was just seeing loads of yes content, very uplifting, and I felt this is going great. But when I was able to see the ads, the No campaign are running, and the volume of engagements they were getting, it was just like, okay, realizing what other people's experiences are as well. So we worked very closely with Together for Yes and collaborated quite closely with them throughout. They were feeding back loads of information to us throughout. One of the most, I guess, the most beneficial forms of information they gave back to us was lots of insights from their canvassing groups. So their canvassing teams were able to feed back to us and tell us what locations in Ireland were coming out strongly yes or strongly no. So what we were able to do then is, if an area, for example, an area in Dublin 2, were coming out as strong yes voters, we were able to then exclude them from our concern centre targeting, which may seem a bit mad, but again, just to remind you, we didn't have that much budget, so we just didn't want to be targeting the yes voters with this content. Similarly, if an area was coming out as strong no voters, we didn't target them either. Again, might seem crazy, but in those few weeks before the referendum, we actually weren't trying to convince no voters to vote yes. We were trying to convince yes voters to get out and vote and talk about the campaign, and to convince the concerned centre to vote yes. So getting these insights are really valuable. We're always telling our clients, like, please feed back business insights. And this is just an example of how we could utilise that in a campaign. So on to the results of the campaign. As I mentioned, driving donations was a massive objective for us, and they initially set the crowdfunding target of donations to be €100,000. So I set up loads of ads on Facebook with the Donate Now button. This €100,000 was reached in a matter of hours. So we changed to 200,000 and then 250,000, and my hands were getting really tired because I was updating all the copy, and it was quite stressful. But eventually I was like, lads, let's just set the target to 500,000. And we did, and we actually raised €580,000 in the space of 24 hours. 72% of that came from social media. Our clients always say that a really good ROAS, usually for them, is about 3 to 1. The ROAS of this was actually 210 to 1. We couldn't actually spend the advertising budget we had because people were sharing the ads so much, commenting on them so much. The organic reach was massive. So this, I think, really shows not only the power of the share on social media, but also the generosity of Irish people as well. So driving shares and engagement was really important. Making sure we mobilise the yes voters to talk about it, to use the hashtag to share content was really important. In 8 weeks, with just the paid campaigns, we reached over 1.9 million people and engaged over 1.4 and had over 1.4 million engagements. Without context, though, that might not mean too much. So, and without comparing to the No campaign. So using social listening, we can actually compare how many times a hashtag was used. So we're able to compare the Together for Yes hashtag with the Save the 8th hashtag. You can see that the Together for Yes hashtag had over 250,000 mentions compared to the Save the 8th at over 90,000. When I mentioned earlier about the budget, them having much larger budgets, this is pretty impressive. But I know some of you may be thinking, okay, I remember being on Facebook at that time and there might have been a yes piece of content, but 100 of the comments could have been from the No campaign and vice versa. So this doesn't really tell the full picture. But we're able to also track something called sentiment against campaigns. So you can see what was the sentiment of people using this hashtag like. So we're able to see that the sentiment towards the Together for Yes hashtag was 82% positive compared to the Save the 8th hashtag, which was 65% positive. So everyone talking about Together for Yes had much more positive sentiment, which I think is a reflection of the content that was being targeted to them. But, of course, the main result on the 24th of May was that 1.4 million, actually over 1.4 million people voted yes to remove the 8th Amendment. I just have a short video now, which I think kind of summarises the feeling of the country on that day.
Votes in favour of the proposal, 1,429,981.
So hard for women's rights for so many years now, and we can see it's finally coming true.
So overwhelming, but in the best way possible. Like, we never expected that it would be so much of a landslide that it's seeming to be, and that just, it makes it feel so much better because it's the majority, it's what the people of Ireland want, and that's so
Ireland has finally grown up. Face the fact, don't ship to abroad, deal with it here safely. For me, for my daughters and my grandchildren.
For all women in Ireland, it is just momentous. Nobody has to travel anymore. They can be looked after in their own country.
We made history! We made history! We made history!
Yeah, so I guess we were just really, really grateful to have even played the tiniest part in this campaign. Having worked closely together for Yes, I was able to see how much work was actually going on behind the scenes. And not just of people directly involved with the campaign, but just of the general public as well. And everyone who had all those really tough conversations those few months before the referendum. For me personally, it was definitely a career highlight getting to work on this campaign. And being able to take all the insights and learning that we get from working on your campaigns to put it into something as powerful as this was extremely rewarding. Thank you very much.